I knew the company was finished the moment Jessica Sterling walked into that conference room like she owned the place. Which, technically, her daddy's board position meant she kind of did. I'm Michael Thompson, but everyone calls me Mick. I'm 58 years old, and I've been keeping TitanLogistics Corp systems running for the past 12 years. Jessica was 26, fresh out of Stanford with an MBA and enough buzzwords to choke a horse. She had that look, you know the one, designer everything, phone glued to her hand, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to fix something that actually matters when it breaks at 3 a.m. on a Sunday. I was sitting in my usual spot in the back, nursing my coffee and watching her set up her presentation. 12 years in corporate time makes you ancient. I'm the guy who remembers when this place ran on 3 servers and a prayer. I'm the one who built the systems that kept us alive during the 2020-2021 supply chain crisis when every other logistics firm was going under like dominoes in a hurricane. But to Jessica, I was just some old timer taking up space and salary budget. See, I didn't start out in tech. I did 8 years in the Navy, working on ship navigation systems and communications equipment. When I got out in '98, I figured my skills with complex systems would translate to the civilian world. Turned out I was right. Started with government contracts, moved into banking compliance, then logistics. By the time I landed at TitanLogistics in 2011, I'd seen every kind of system failure you could imagine. The meeting started with her clapping her hands together like she was calling a kindergarten class to attention. "Listen up, team," she announced. "I've been analyzing our infrastructure, and honestly, it's embarrassing. We're running legacy garbage that belongs in a museum. We need to pivot to a cloud-native, AI-driven ecosystem by Q4. She clicked to her slide. It looked like a toddler's drawing of circles and arrows, all connected with lines that meant absolutely nothing. But what got my attention was her plan to delete the core logistics module, the heart of everything we did. That legacy garbage she was talking about, that was my baby. That was the COBOL to Python integration system I built during the COVID nightmare, working 16-hour days while my wife brought me sandwiches and coffee. That system processed $180 million in annual revenue and handled 78% of our vendor compliance automatically. When the world's supply chains were collapsing in 2020, we were the ones still moving freight because my system could adapt faster than anyone else's. I cleared my throat. Heads turned. I hadn't spoken up in a meeting in months, but this was too much. "Excuse me," I said, "but that system handles 78% of our vendor compliance automatically. You delete that and you're not modernizing, you're lobotomizing the company." Jessica turned to look at me with that practiced smile they teach in business school. She glanced at my faded Carhartt shirt and work boots, then checked her Apple Watch like I was wasting her precious time. "And you are?" she asked, even though she knew exactly who I was. I was the line item on the budget her daddy couldn't explain but wouldn't let anyone cut. "I'm Mick," I said, keeping it simple. "I built the backbone you're trying to surgically remove." She actually laughed. It was this wet, condescending sound that reminded me of every entitled officer I'd dealt with back in my Navy days, the kind who'd never been in a real storm but thought they knew better than the chief petty officers who kept the ship running. "Right, Mick. Look, I appreciate what you did back in the day, but we're not running a history museum here. We're building the future. Your monolithic architecture is holding us hostage. We need agility, velocity. We don't need whatever this patchwork is, old-timer. Old-timer!" The words hung in the air like a bad smell. The other engineers stared at their laptops, afraid to make eye contact. They knew something Jessica didn't. They knew I wasn't just the architect of our systems. They knew I wasn't even technically a regular employee. See, back in 2011, when TitanLogistics was nothing but a struggling startup with more lawsuits than customers, they couldn't afford my rate. I was a contractor who'd worked government systems and banking compliance. My hourly rate made CFOs cry actual tears. So my lawyer, Heavy Metal Dennis, who operates out of a strip mall next to a motorcycle repair shop, came up with a different deal. I didn't sign an employment contract. I signed a licensing agreement. I incorporated my own LLC, Thompson System Solutions, and licensed the core platform to them. Think Microsoft or Oracle. You don't buy the software, you rent the right to use it. And like any landlord, I kept the master key. The contract was ironclad. My wife, who spent 20 years as a paralegal before retiring, made sure of that. She read every word, questioned every clause. "Michael," she'd said, "if you're going to bet our future on this, we better make sure the dice aren't loaded against us." Jessica didn't know any of this. She saw a 58-year-old guy in work clothes and assumed I was some diversity hire from the old days, maybe kept around out of pity or legal obligation. She thought she was firing dead weight. She didn't realize she was trying to evict the landlord while still living in his house. "Okay, Jessica," I said, leaning back in my chair. The plastic creaked under my weight. These conference room chairs weren't built for guys who'd spent years hauling equipment around Navy ships. "You're the boss. Agility, velocity. Got it." She smiled that MBA smile and turned back to her meaningless diagram. "Great. We're going to start sunsetting the legacy modules immediately. HR will be restructuring to align with our new digital transformation initiative. Restructuring. Corporate speak for firing the people who actually knew how things worked." Didn't argue. I didn't tell her she was about to step on a landmine. I just sat there, listening to her talk about synergies and scalability while I checked the date on my phone. My licensing contract renewed quarterly, automatically, unless payment was missed. The next payment was due in 3 days, October 1st, to be exact. Section 4 of my contract was very specific about what happened if the licensee attempted to modify, reverse engineer, or materially disparage the software. And Section 6 was the nuclear option. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk and logged into my private admin console, not the company system, my own server that I rent for $50 a month from a data center in Oklahoma. Jessica wanted a revolution. She was about to get an education. The freeze-out started immediately. First, the calendar invites stopped coming. Then the strategy meetings. I'd sit at my desk, listening to muffled voices from the glass-walled conference room where Jessica was holding court, erasing my system diagrams and replacing them with buzzwords like holistic integration and scalable solutions. It's funny how fast you become invisible in corporate America. 12 years of 60-hour weeks, 12 years of weekend calls to fix crashed servers, and suddenly nobody could make eye contact in the hallway. People I'd worked with for years started avoiding me like I had something contagious. In their world, getting fired spreads like a disease. They figured if they got too close to me, Jessica might decide they were part of the problem too. I understood it. These were good people with mortgages and kids in college. Self-preservation kicks in when you see the executioner sharpening her axe. Then Jessica introduced Christopher, the new solutions architect. Kid looked like he was fresh out of college, wearing sneakers that had never seen a server room floor. He wandered over to my desk with a kombucha in his hand, looking nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. "Hey Mick, right?" he said. "Jessica told me you're the, legacy systems historian. I'd love to pick your brain about the old architecture before we deprecate it." Historian. Deprecate. I turned my chair around slowly, studying this kid who was supposed to replace a dozen years of institutional knowledge. "Christopher, do you know what a load balancer is?" He blinked. "Well, yeah, we use AWS for that, right? Everything's serverless now." "Serverless," I repeated, taking a sip of my coffee. "Right. Because the cloud is just magic, not actual hardware sitting in a warehouse in Texas that melts down if you don't optimize your database queries properly." He walked away looking confused, probably to go ask Jessica what a database query was. Poor kid. He was walking into a minefield with a map drawn by someone who'd never seen a real explosion. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, getting pushed out for being legacy when I'd spent my whole career adapting to new technology. In the Navy, we'd gone from paper charts to GPS systems. In banking, I'd helped migrate from mainframes to distributed systems. At TitanLogistics, I'd built bridges between COBOL databases from the 80s and modern Python applications. But to Jessica, experience wasn't an asset, it was a liability. She wanted fresh blood. People who'd never seen a system fail catastrophically, who didn't ask uncomfortable questions about backup plans and disaster recovery. By Thursday, my access to the development environment was revoked. I got the standard email, permissions updated by admin.js. I didn't fight it. I didn't storm into Jessica's office demanding explanations. I just opened my personal laptop and checked the bank account for Thompson System Solutions, LLC. It was September 28th. The quarterly licensing fee was due October 1st at midnight. Usually Patrick Murphy, our old CFO who actually understood contracts, had it on auto-pay. But Patrick had been restructured last month too, replaced by some kid who thought QuickBooks was enterprise financial software. I refreshed the banking page. No pending transaction. I checked again an hour later. Still nothing. I sat there watching the clock, feeling that familiar calm that comes from 20 years in the Navy. When you've been in real storms, the kind where 30-foot waves are trying to flip your destroyer and you're working by flashlight because the main power's out, you don't panic when some rookie starts playing with the navigation. You just check your watch and calculate how far you are from shore. I pulled up my contract on the screen. I keep digital copies, but I also have the original signed in blue ink, locked in a fireproof safe at home next to my discharge papers and the deed to the house. Clause 3.1. Payment obligations. Failure to remit licensing fees within 24 hours of the due date constitutes material breach. Clause 3.2. No cure period for willful non-payment or unauthorized modification of licensed materials. Jessica had already violated the modification clause by trying to patch her new cloud-native systems on top of my core infrastructure without proper authorization. The automated logs showed 3 separate attempts to reverse engineer the authentication protocols. Now she was about to violate the payment clause too. I could have warned her. I could have walked into her office and said, "Hey kid, you're about to shut down the engine of your own company." But then I remembered old timer. I remembered the way she looked at me like I was furniture that needed to be thrown out to make room for something newer and shinier. So I let the clock tick. Friday at 4:00 p.m., HR sent me a calendar invite for 4:30. Subject, quick sync. Location, conference room B. Classic move. Fire people at the end of the week so they can't cause a scene, and the rest of the staff has the weekend to forget you ever existed. I started packing. Not much. A few photos of the grandkids, my Leatherman tool that had been with me since my Navy days, and the small cactus my wife gave me that somehow survived the office environment. "Like you," she'd said when she brought it in, "tough enough to grow anywhere." I wiped my company laptop clean. Not just deleted files. I ran a military-grade scrub on the drive. 7 passes, random data overwrite. Not because I had anything to hide, but because I'm a professional. You don't leave intel lying around for the enemy to find. I checked the bank account one last time. Still zero. Jessica was really going to do this. She was going to fire me and stiff me on the contract payment, thinking she could just steal my work and move on. The arrogance was breathtaking. Conference room B was the glass fishbowl near the elevators, designed so everyone could watch your execution. Jessica was there, arms crossed, looking like she was posing for Forbes 30 Under 30. Karen Martinez from HR sat at the table, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else, possibly dead. "Have a seat, Mick," Karen said softly. She was good people. Been here almost as long as me, worked her way up from receptionist. She knew this was wrong, but she had her own family to think about. I sat down and placed my manila folder on the table. Jessica eyed it suspiciously, probably thinking it was some desperate presentation to save my job. "So," Jessica started, not even letting Karen do her job properly, "we've been evaluating team structure. And as we move toward this high-velocity cloud-native future, your skill set doesn't align with our trajectory." "Trajectory," I repeated, thinking about the ballistics training from my Navy days. "Like a missile heading for a mountain." Her jaw tightened. That smile was starting to crack around the edges. "We're terminating your employment, effective immediately. Karen has the paperwork. Standard severance package, 2 weeks. We'll need your badge and laptop." Karen slid papers across the table, avoiding my eyes. "We also need you to sign this NDA and non-disparagement agreement to receive severance." I didn't touch the papers. I looked directly at Jessica. "Just to be clear, you're terminating our professional relationship completely. All of it." "That's what fired means, old-timer," Jessica snapped. The mask was slipping now. I could see the real person underneath. Spoiled, impatient, used to getting her way because Daddy's money always made problems disappear. "Okay." I pulled out my badge and slid it across the table. Then I placed the company laptop next to it. "I'm no longer an employee of TitanLogistics." "Good," Jessica said, pushing off from the wall. "Security will escort you out." "Wait." I put my hand on the manila folder. "We're done with the employment part. Now we need to discuss the vendor relationship." Jessica frowned. "What are you talking about?" I opened the folder and pulled out the licensing agreement, the pages flagged with yellow sticky notes at all the important sections. "I don't work for you, Jessica." "I never really did." My company, Thompson System Solutions, licenses the technology that runs your procurement, logistics, and vendor payments. I was just part of the package. On-site support included in the premium tier. Jessica laughed. Actually laughed out loud. She picked up the contract, glanced at the cover page, and tossed it back down like it was contaminated. This is ancient paperwork from the startup days. We own everything you wrote while you were here. Intellectual property assignment. It's standard. Actually, I said, tapping paragraph 4 with my finger, read that section. All code, architecture, and algorithms remain the sole property of Thompson System Solutions. TitanLogistics is granted a non-exclusive, revocable license contingent on timely payment and adherence to usage guidelines. I watched her eyes scan the paragraph. I saw the exact moment the words registered in her brain, but her ego refused to process them. It was like watching someone stare at a stop sign and insist it was green. "This is garbage," she sputtered. "You were on payroll. That voids this whole contract." "Check with legal," I said calmly. I was on a 1099 independent contractor status for the first 3 years, then moved to W-2 for administrative convenience per Addendum C, but the intellectual property rights never transferred. Thompson System Solutions still holds the copyright registration. Karen was staring at the contract now, her paralegal training kicking in. She could read legal documents, and I could see the recognition dawning in her eyes. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 58 years. "Here's the situation, Jessica. You just fired the on-site support. That's fine. I was getting tired of the coffee anyway. But you also missed the quarterly licensing payment that was due yesterday at midnight. That's breach of contract." "I'm not paying you a dime," Jessica hissed, her face turning red. "This is extortion." "It's a contract," I corrected. "You didn't pay, you fired the admin, so the software has reverted to its default state according to the license terms, which is offline. Turn it back on right now or I'll sue you into the ground." I looked at her for a long moment, remembering every 3 a.m. emergency patch, every weekend I'd spent in the server room instead of fishing with my grandson. "Jessica, you're currently using unlicensed intellectual property. My lawyer is drafting a cease and desist letter as we speak. If you attempt to bypass the security locks, that's a DMCA violation. Federal crime. You look good in orange jumpsuits. Might clash with that designer blazer." There was silence, then muffled voices in the background. Legal counsel whispering urgently in Jessica's ear. I heard the words federal liability and breach of fiduciary duty. "What do you want?" Jessica pleaded, her voice cracking like ice on a pond. "Put Stephen on the phone. Stephen Blackstone, the CEO. The man who'd bought 3 boats while I was fixing his systems on weekends, who'd promised me a pension plan that kept getting restructured every few years." A new voice came on the line 5 minutes later. Deep, authoritative, but currently shaking like a leaf. "Mick, what the hell is happening down there?" "Morning, Stephen. Your VP of Digital Innovation just evicted your software vendor and forgot to pay the rent. Now she's surprised that the lights went out." Stephen tried the Weir family approach immediately. "Look, emotions are high here. Jessica made a mistake. She's young, she didn't understand the nuances of your arrangement. Come back in, we'll discuss a significant raise. A big one." "I don't want a raise, Stephen. I don't want my job back either. That bridge didn't just burn, it evaporated into atoms." "Then what do you want?" I took a sip of bourbon and looked out at my neighbor wrestling with his lawnmower. "You have 2 options. Option A, Jessica builds you a new system. She says she can do cloud-native AI microservices, whatever. Maybe it'll only take 12 years like mine did. Good luck with that. We can't wait 12 years. You know we can't. Option B, you purchase a one-time perpetual license for the source code, full ownership transfer. You get the keys, the documentation, everything. I walk away, you never see me again. Fine, we'll buy it." "How much?" I'd done the math during my drive home. $1.4 million. The silence stretched so long I thought the line had gone dead. Then, "That's insane, Mick. That's extortion. That's 0.8% of the crisis period savings my system generated during the 2020-2021 supply chain collapse, plus a consultation fee for having to listen to your daughter-in-law call me old-timer. I need time to arrange financing. You have 35 minutes. After that, the data export protocol initiates automatic purge of customer information to comply with privacy regulations. Wouldn't want to keep user data on an unlicensed system. That would be a GDPR violation. Hefty fines on those. I hung up and poured another bourbon. 32 minutes later, my phone rang. Laura Richardson from legal. Sharp woman who'd worked her way up from document review to general counsel. "We'll wire the money," she said, her voice professionally neutral. "But the system comes back online immediately, the second the wire clears my account. Transferring now." I refreshed my banking app. Pending transaction. $400,000. Source: TitanLogistics Corp. "It's there," I said, my heart doing something strange in my chest. I tabbed to my terminal. Command: update license status to perpetual. Command: cancel data purge sequence. Command: transfer ownership credentials. Enter. 2 minutes later, Andrew texted me. "We're green. Everything's working." Jessica locked herself in her office. People are actually cheering in the break room. I didn't cheer. I sat back in my chair and felt a kind of exhaustion I hadn't experienced since my last day in the Navy. It was over. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the lobby of Apex Freight, Titan Logistics' biggest competitor. They'd been trying to poach me for years. Brian Collins, their engineering director, came out with a grin that could have powered half of Dallas. "Heard you burned Titan Logistics to the ground and then sold them the ashes," he said. "Just enforced a contract. Strictly business. We're struggling with vendor compliance. System crashes twice a week. Heard Titan Logistics has some miracle code that never fails. Not a miracle, just good engineering. And yes, I built it. Can you build something similar for us?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Can't give you the same code. IP ownership transferred legally. But that system is 12 years old, built on legacy Python integration. I've been sketching out a new architecture in my spare time. Rust-based, high concurrency processing. It wouldn't just match Titan Logistics. It would make them look like they're running on punch cards. How long to build it? 6 months with the right team and complete autonomy. No MBAs, no product evangelists, just me and some engineers who know the difference between a pointer and a paperclip." Brian extended his hand. "Welcome to Apex, Mick." 6 months later, we launched Apex Prime. It destroyed the market like Sherman marching through Georgia. Titan Logistics stock dropped 35% in the first quarter. They were stuck with a system they barely understood, maintained by terrified junior developers too scared to change a single line of code. Jessica eventually quit. Last I heard, she pivoted to cryptocurrency consulting, which figures. Another industry where you can sell hot air and disappear before anyone realizes the balloon is empty. As for me, I'm sitting in my new home office, paid for by that licensing fee. I've got a bourbon collection that would make a Kentucky distiller weep with pride and a 65-inch TV dedicated exclusively to John Wayne movies. I'm not happy exactly. Happiness is for people who don't know how the sausage gets made, but I'm satisfied. I still have that original contract framed on my wall. Section 4, the paragraph that bought this house and secured my retirement. Sometimes late at night, I think about all the guys like me out there, the invisible architects keeping the lights on while the Jessicas of the world take credit. We're watching, we read the fine print, and we remember everything. So next time some MBA calls you old-timer or says your experience is obsolete, don't get mad. Just make sure you own the keys.